The list of the biggest Fortune 500 companies was released this morning. Walmart reclaimed the top spot from Exxon Mobil. Two banks rose in the rankings. A few home builders and automaker GM dropped out of the top 10. Probably not a surprise to you. But here to discuss the list in full is Leigh Gallagher. She is assistant managing editor at Fortune magazine. Leigh, glad to have you in the newsroom with us. Thanks for coming in. So you arranged these companies. You did your research and measured by revenue only. Is that correct?
Yes, this has historically always been a list about revenue. So it's the biggest companies in the U.S. by revenue.
So give us the top five.
So the top five, as you mentioned, the big headline here is Walmart #1. Last year it was Exxon, and for the past couple of years it's kind of been a neck-and-neck race between these two. They flip-flopped a bunch of times. This year, Walmart is far above Exxon, with revenues of about $404 billion compared to Exxon's $284 billion. So the big story there is that Walmart has, as we know, benefited from a recessionary environment. It was able to inch its revenues up a little bit. Profits are up 7%, and it's just done really well, while Exxon has suffered from falling oil prices. So it's seen a big revenue drop.
But I guess we should make it clear, this is nothing about the company's quality of life for employees, the way they run their business.
We do other
it's a
lists for that.
scorecard.
This is purely who is biggest. These are, this is a measure of scale. The average company on this list has employees of 21,000, so they're huge.
Leigh, speaking of that, it seems to me this has got to be the easiest list in the world to compile. And I know you're going to hate me for this, but I literally generated one that looks just like yours in all of 30 seconds
Erik
on the
is a
Bloomberg.
maniac. Sorry about that. We can't really bring it.
What's the value to readers these days? Because you don't even need a Bloomberg. You can have a Reuters terminal, a Thomson terminal. You can have Capital IQ or FactSet, and you can do your list like this on your own.
But then you're taking what the companies are reporting. So we basically take those numbers and we run them through a fine-tooth comb. We have a separate set, a lot of companies have different set of standards of how they report revenues, when they report special charges. We kind of filter all that out, and so this is the definitive list. And it's important to have one similar list measured by the same standards over decades. And so it makes for a way to sort of compare.
Now speaking of decades, I mean, obviously you have a bird's eye view. Any surprises to you as the editor?
A couple. I mean, Walmart was kind of a surprise. I would say the bigger surprises are what happened to GM, which has been on the top 10 for as long as we've been doing this list, and it dropped to number 16. So maybe that's not such a surprise, but it was pretty big.
Filed for bankruptcy.
Right, exactly. Other surprises are all the home builders fell off. Now, we knew that they didn't do well, but to have them all just vanish entirely was kind of a surprise. I would say the biggest surprise to us internally was the profit story, what's happening here. We know that all these companies have been cost-cutting for the past, three or four quarters, but we saw a rise in profits that was 331%, which was unbelievable, especially when you look at the revenue figure, which usually pulls profits up or down. That was down 8% across the list. So these companies have gotten incredibly efficient, as we know, but the actual numbers were really, really big.
Leigh, I have to jump in with a skeptic's voice once again, because you guys call this the list of the biggest U.S. corporations or companies, but there are some big companies missing. Cargill isn't there. Koch Industries isn't there. In fact, the 10 biggest private U.S. companies would all fit into the top 100. Why not do a little extra work and put the companies that we know exist into the definitive list of the biggest U.S. corporations?
Well, I can assure you we've thought about it. There's a very specific set of rules, and the companies have to be reporting quarterly statements. There's a whole set of rules that they have to fit by. Otherwise, there's a lot of companies beyond the ones that you just mentioned that would fit in at the margins.
Leigh, we thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
That is Leigh Gallagher, and of course, the Fortune 500 issue does hit stands on Monday.